The smell of old lacquer reached me before the passenger did. It seeped through the cracked theater doors on West 44th, curling into the damp night like the building was exhaling its own past. Half-dead bulbs stuttered above the marquee, throwing sick light onto rain-slick asphalt. The block felt cut out of Times Square, quieter than it had any right to be. He came out of the shadows, tall, collar up, a bundle tucked under his arm, wrapped in cloth soft with age. He slid into the back seat without a word. Greenwich Village. McDougal near Bleecker. Voice low, flat, like he was saying it to the glass. The scent rode in with him, heavier now inside the cab. He held it close, arm locked, like he didn't trust gravity. At red lights the silence stretched, broken only by the faint shift of leather as he adjusted his grip. I drove steady, the streets thinned of life. Near Sheridan Square, I caught his reflection in his storefront window, a sharp profile, jaw tight, sleeves slipped enough to show the cloth bundle's corner. Dark stains clung there, like ink or old paint. He said here, before we'd even reached the block, made me stop at a narrow brick building, gate half pulled down. No lights inside. He paid fast and disappeared into shadow, bundle still under his arm. When the door slammed, the cab felt bigger. Then I saw it, wedged in the corner of the back seat. Another bundle, wrapped in the same tired fabric, dropped in his hurry. Smaller, heavier than it looked when I picked it up, the same ghost smell still on it. I could have tossed it into lost and found come morning. But the thought of it sitting under fluorescent lights with forgotten umbrellas and cell phones didn't sit right. I stepped out, checked the block. Quiet. No sign of him. Back inside, the bundle waited on the passenger seat like it had its own agenda. My hands twitched at the knot. Instead, I swung the cab south, back toward the theater, thinking maybe he'd circled back. The bulbs still stuttered. A guard stood in the lobby glow, collar zipped high. He squinted when I asked about the man in the long coat. Yeah, headed toward Ninth. Didn't talk to anyone. I turned west, the bundle beside me. Streets empty, but for the cab's hum and the thought of what I was carrying. Ninth Avenue at that hour had nothing to give me. Just dark storefronts and a couple of diners leaking grease into the cold. I rolled slow, scanning sidewalks, mirrors, alleys. No trace of him. The bundle rode on the passenger seat, too heavy for its size, tugging at my attention like a magnet. At a side street near 23rd, I killed the engine. The rain had picked back up, thin needles streaking the windshield, wipers smearing neon into watercolor ribbons. My fingers itched to pull at the loose knot. It would have been easy. Too easy. I didn't. Some lines belong to the night, not to you. Instead, I thought about his vague address, the way he'd said near Bleecker, like he was keeping distance built in. If he lived close, the guards toward Ninth didn't mean much. Instinct said double back. So I swung toward the village again, let the cab hum down narrow streets. That's when I spotted it. A fourth-floor window, a flicker of light, a shadow slipping past. A rundown brick building, paint faded green at the door, buzzer panel patched with half-torn labels. I pressed 4B. Static, then a voice, low and muffled. Yeah, I think you left something in my cab, I said. Silence. Long enough for me to think the line was dead. Then a buzz, weak, reluctant. Come up. Inside smelled of fresh paint laid over old damp. The stairs groaned under tired linoleum. For flights weren't far, but each step stretched out. A door cracked on the third landing, just enough for a cat to slip out and vanish. No words from behind it. When I reached 4B, the door was already ajar. He stood there, coat gone, sweater sleeves pushed up, hair damp like he'd washed fast. You found me, he said. No relief in it. More like he'd expected me. Wasn't sure what that meant. I held out the bundle. He didn't take it right away, just glanced at the stairwell behind me, then at the cloth. Finally, he stepped aside. Better come in. The apartment was small, dim, one lamp, a couch fraying at the arm, shelves lined with mismatched mugs. Rain streaked the lone window. He pointed at the couch. "Put it there." I did. The smell of lacquer and dust hit harder in that room, like it belonged there. He circled the couch, keeping distance, and dropped into a kitchen chair that looked borrowed from another room. "You didn't open it?" "No." He gave a short nod, almost to himself. Then his hands moved. 2 quick pulls, the knot undone. The cloth fell away, and the thing inside caught the lamplight. At first it looked like a block of wood. Then the shape cleared. A mask. Pale, chipped, paint flaking off in spots to show the grain beneath. Eye holes too narrow, mouth curved faintly like it had once tried on a smile. Older than both of us. He ran his thumb along a crack, clumsily mended years ago. "My father wore this," he said. "Not Halloween. On stage." His voice thinned, fighting its own weight. He was an actor. Small theaters around here. This was from his last play. The theater shut down a week later. He never worked again. The rain on the window tapped harder. Somewhere down the block, a door slammed, the sound climbing the walls. He went on, eyes still on the mask. He walked out with it that night. Said it was the only role worth remembering. Kept it under his bed. His fingers traced the jawline, as if it still carried warmth. I stayed quiet. "He died in this building," he said. "Different apartment, 3 floors down. I was 20. Got here too late for anything but the mess." The words came flat, like he'd spent years sanding them down. The lamp cut sharp shadows across his face. One moment present, the next half somewhere else. "I moved into 4B last year. First time I've been back. Thought maybe I'd get used to it." He let out a thin laugh that never reached his eyes. "Hasn't worked." The mask rested against his knees now, fabric draped loose. The room smelled heavier. Lacquer, damp, old paint. "You could have kept driving," he said suddenly. "Dropped it at the garage." "Maybe." Figured it mattered. That hung in the air until a siren wound close, washed past, and faded. "Tonight's the anniversary," he said finally. "Last show. Last time he wore it. I went back to the theater, but they were tearing it down. Felt wrong." His voice shrank around the word. He wrapped the mask again, slower this time, not neat. I thought of how its scent had followed him, how some things don't leave, even when you want them gone. He set the bundle on the table, away from both of us. "You should get going. It's late." I stood, the floor creaking louder than it had on the way up, like it wanted me noticed this time. At the door, he said, "Thanks for bringing it back. Most wouldn't bother." "Most don't get the right nights," I answered. He almost smiled, but it broke in the middle. The hallway air hit colder, holding its breath until the door clicked shut behind me. My steps thudded against loose linoleum as I went down. On the second landing, the same cat sat square on the stair, eyes lit sharp. It didn't move until I was close enough to hear it breathe, then slipped into shadow, tail flicking once. By the street, the rain had stopped. Puddles still clung to lamplight, rippling whenever a drop fell from an awning. The air carried a damp, metallic edge, like the city was cooling itself off. I slid into the cab. The seat was faintly warm where he'd been. My hands rested on the wheel longer than they had to before I turned the key. The engine's low hum filled the space, steady, grounding. In the rear view, the building's brick face stared back. 4 floors of old red, cracked, rain-darkened. A single window glowed faintly on the 4th, then blinked dark as I turned the corner. Southbound, the city opened again. Lights, bars emptying, stray figures chasing warmth or avoiding it. The wipers scraped once across a dry windshield before I shut them off. I kept thinking of the mask, the pale face, its cracks like scars, the way it looked too fragile to outlast another drop. Wondered if he'd leave it out now or bury it under another bed, unseen but never gone. By the west side, Trucks and cabs claimed the streets again. I let the meter rest. Some nights weren't built for new fares. At a red light near a shuttered deli, the smell of wet metal seeped through the window crack. From somewhere distant, a saxophone drifted, notes bending like they hadn't decided where to land. When the light changed, I didn't rush. Took the long way back, streets where old neon clung to buildings even though no sign had lit for years. Beneath me, the subway rolled once, a hollow thud I felt in my chest more than my ears. On 10th, the rear view caught me. Just me, the empty back seat, and a faint trace of lacquer still hanging on the air. I rolled the window down, let the cold night flush it out. Some fares press their weight into you whether you ask for it or not. This one had. I drifted toward the theater district without meaning to. Ended up right back on that block. Nothing had changed. Half-lit marquee, twitching bulbs, that slow breath of dust and varnish spilling from the cracked door. The guard was gone. Street empty. I eased to the curb and let the engine run. Sat there, watching the smell curl out across wet pavement. For a moment, I thought about stepping inside, standing where he'd stood, breathing what was left. But it wasn't mine to take. Instead, I rolled away, tires whispering, catching green after green, the city opening ahead in long, empty strokes. The mask kept floating back, its pale face, paint chipped down to scars, the way he handled it like it could still break him. I wondered if he'd tuck it away again or finally let it stay in the open. Either way, it wouldn't leave. Things like that don't. At 34th, the wind shoved the cab sideways, rattling lids and knotting plastic against hydrants. The city showing its weight, reminding me who was just passing through. By the time I hit the west side proper, the streets were busier again. Late buses hissing, delivery trucks clattering, cabs chasing their last fares. I wasn't in a hurry to join them. Nights like this ask for silence more than money. I parked under the garage awning. Rain had started again, soft this time, tapping out a rhythm overhead. My hand lingered on the meter key before I pulled it. Thought about the mask, bundled neat in that fourth-floor apartment, carrying its own gravity. And just like that, another night came back. Years ago, another passenger, another bundle. A woman with a battered violin case, empty inside, though I didn't know it at first. That ride turned the whole night sideways. I'll bring that one next time. If you're riding with me, come along, subscribe, and catch it when it lands.